Please help me welcome Socheata.
Can you hear me? Everything's good? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really want to acknowledge Northeast Wisconsin Technical University for inviting me to speak here this morning. And I don't mean that to be an underhanded compliment to myself. I really want to thank you for being here on a Wednesday morning at 11:30 to hear a talk about genocide, of all things. I want to make sure we get to the computer screen now. Thank you, thank you. So I don't know how all of you feel about late night comedy. You may be a little bit too young to recognize this reference, but sometimes I remind people of Debbie Downer. So at parties and social events, you know, people ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them that I started this nonprofit organization that's documenting stories of the Cambodian genocide. And they often don't know how to react to me after I tell them this. So they'll say something like, "Oh, wow, that's really important. I'm going to go get some guacamole now." And I just want to stop them and say, "No, really, I'm a fun person, I promise." But by that time, it's usually too late. I am convinced, however, that Americans do want to become engaged in this issue that has come to define the last century and likely the next one. And my mission is to engage people in an emotional way with this issue, even if it means, you know, keeping it light sometimes. My personal journey started one Christmas day a few years ago when my parents called a family meeting. And they called this meeting, they brought all of us into a back bedroom and they closed the door. And in that family meeting, my parents told me a secret that they had kept for about 25 years. They told me that even though they had raised me in this normal nuclear family with 2 parents and 4 children, my family isn't normal and it isn't nuclear at all. And in fact, my 2 older sisters are actually my cousins who had been orphaned during the Cambodian genocide. And my brother is my half-brother from my mother's previous marriage. Her first husband and daughter died during the Cambodian genocide, which meant that our family was really this patchwork quilt of survivors. It also meant that I was the only child of my 2 parents. And in that moment, I realized 2 things. The first thing was that I really didn't know anything about who my family was. And the second thing was that my family was essentially formed by this moment in history, the Cambodian genocide or the Khmer Rouge genocide, which was something that at that time I really didn't know anything about. So on that day, I would be launched onto this longer journey that would bring me to Cambodia to record stories of my family's survival and escape. I would go on to direct a documentary film, which some of you saw last night, called New Year Baby, which eventually aired on PBS. And then later I would start this organization called Khmer Legacies. Its mission is to record videotape testimonies of survivors by having the younger generation interview the older generation. Having started my career in journalism and in media, I really believed in the power of stories to educate, to tell the truth, and sometimes even to heal. Yet after a number of presentations and screenings of New Year Baby, I would always have at least one person in the audience ask me this one question. And the question was, you know, if Cambodians are so reluctant to talk, if Cambodians don't want to tell their story, why should you push them? And I take these questions very seriously because it brings up an issue that every person who wants to be of service, to do some good in the world, should consider. Am I giving this person what they need or what I want to give them? You know, it's the kind of criticism that's leveled against international aid and development organizations constantly. You know, why should I try to change or transform this behavior in Cambodians if it is their only coping mechanism? And the larger question is, you know, what does it take, both a country and an individual, to heal from something like genocide? So before I launch into a larger discussion on what it takes to heal, I think it would be useful to have a short history lesson about what happened to Cambodia in the late 1970s. And it all starts with the Vietnam War, really. During the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese communists were actually smuggling arms through part of Cambodia, through the eastern parts of Cambodia. And as a result, the United States started this secret bombing campaign. And through this time, between 1969 and 1973, a greater tonnage of bombs were dropped on Cambodia than has been dropped on any other country in history, including Japan during World War II. So during this time, the country was completely destabilized by hundreds of thousands of Cambodians dead from the bombing. There were these refugees coming into the city because of all the fighting and the bombing going on in the eastern parts. The infrastructure was completely destabilized. And there was the ousting of this beloved monarch by an unpopular government. So through this time, a communist group called the Khmer Rouge, or the Red Cambodians, began to gain power. And in 1975, led by a leader named Pol Pot, they were able to overthrow the government. And immediately what they did is they evacuated all the cities in order to achieve their dream of an agrarian utopia. So everyone was relocated to the countryside to work forced labor in these labor camps. From 1975 to 1979, approximately 1.7 million, or 20% of the population, died in the span of 4 years from execution, starvation, and disease. And in an effort to destroy the intelligentsia and bourgeois class of Cambodia, it was reported that only 9 doctors and 5 lawyers survived this regime because they were really targeting people who had any kind of education. So the Khmer Rouge fell in 1979, and it was because the Vietnamese invaded from the east and ousted the government. And with the country in chaos and these military clashes continuing, hundreds of thousands of Cambodians fled the border to Thai refugee camps. And then some very small percentage of these refugees had the opportunity to relocate to a third country like the United States, France, or Australia. And my family was, the small percentage that had that opportunity. So today here in the United States, there are roughly 250,000 Cambodians throughout the country. And when they first came, Cambodians were a population that were wholly unprepared to assimilate into this country and thrive. Because the Khmer Rouge had targeted the educated classes, those who had survived were often rice farmers who were illiterate in their own language. They didn't have the skills, they didn't have the education. They came to America with fractured families, often headed by a single mother, or blended families like my family. And in a recent study, it was found that about 62% of Cambodian Americans suffer from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, and 51% suffer from depression. And even those who don't suffer from depression, I think demoralization is really rampant in our communities because our elders are not learning English, they're often living off of welfare. More and more are feeling disconnected from the younger generation. So Cambodian Americans have a lower income level than Asian, Black, and Hispanic populations. Gangs lure a significant number of our Cambodian youth, and many of the elders in the community see this youth violence as an extension of the Khmer Rouge violence, a problem that is compounded by the cultural and language barriers within families. So mental health workers who work with Cambodians say that they see evidence of the younger generation actually suffering from secondary PTSD. Even though their parents may have never talked about their trauma, they can sense the tension and the depression at home. So as I mentioned, my family was one of those families that fled across the Thai-Cambodian border. And I was actually born in the refugee camp on Cambodian New Year, and that's why the title of the film is New Year Baby. And after that Christmas Day revelation that I told you about, I was really left with more questions than I was answers. And I later returned with my parents and my brother to Cambodia to find those answers. Something happened to me while I was in Cambodia shooting the film that Cambodians, like all victims of massive trauma, really want their lives to be remembered. That despite the fact that many Cambodians don't talk about their story, they don't tell their children about the story, like my parents didn't, they do still want to be remembered. They want to remember their loved ones who have died, and they actually want future generations to remember. So while we were in Cambodia, my father and I went in search of one of the camps where actually he and my mother met. And I had a hard time imagining what their living conditions were like. So I had this almost aggressive desire to know and to learn. And in retrospect, I think I had a kind of survivor's guilt about being the only one in my family who had been spared all of this hardship. So my father and I went out in search of this refugee camp. If you see the film, you'll see that my mother has all of the cunning in the family, and she often wears the pants in the family, but my dad is the one who has the better memory. And I remember that our vehicle was traveling down this dirt highway, and it was a dirt road, and so the dust was being kicked up and coating the windows, and it was really hard to see anything. And yet I was asking my 66-year-old father to recognize, to remember any landmarks he could from 25 years ago. Now he was completely emotionally and physically spent after a day of traveling and interviewing people. And he told me, "I'm sorry, nothing looks familiar. I don't remember anything." And the sun was starting to set in Cambodia, and I was afraid that we would actually lose the daylight and we wouldn't have enough time that day to finish shooting. So I just told him to relax and just try to remember. And suddenly we could see, appearing above the treetops, this white concrete structure. And my father said, "Wait, I think that's the Buddhist temple." And we turned our vehicle toward it. We got out of the car and we walked into this pleasant little grove of pink paper flowers blooming. And as I mentioned, the sun was starting to set, and so it was actually a really beautiful and picturesque scene. The land was completely empty, save for a single Buddhist temple. Now, during the Khmer Rouge, Buddhism was actually banned during this time, and monks were executed. The rest of them were defrocked. The Khmer Rouge turned these temples into storage depots or shelters or hospitals. But this particular temple had been restored into a working temple, and so there were these monks with saffron robes walking around. But other than that, there was no other sign, no structures, no houses that reminded one of the Khmer Rouge years. And it was as if everything that the Khmer Rouge had built had been wiped away. It was as if someone, didn't want any reminders left of that era. As I walked through this grove, my father suddenly remembered where my aunt, Mala and Lakina's mother, was buried. And he asked me if I wanted to go back and see this place. And I said, yes, of course. Excuse me. And he said that, she was buried near an old latrine. So we asked around, we asked one of the monks, and he brought us to this old latrine. And the only thing that was left, that was there, was a wrecked concrete platform with 2 holes in it. So here we are standing in front of this old latrine, and the thought in my mind was, this seems like such an undignified place to bury her, next to the old bathroom, essentially. My father said, we thought about actually coming back here and exhuming her body and removing her remains and giving her a proper Buddhist burial. But seeing her here today, it seems that she's at peace, and so there's no need to disturb her. And in that moment, what I realized was that someone had actually buried her there because they intended to find her one day. That burying her was actually a promise that we would not forget her and that we wouldn't leave her behind. And what a gift it was, actually, to be buried next to the old latrine, because it was the only thing that was left standing in this area. And when I looked around at the rice fields around me, I started to wonder, how many unidentified graves are there around us, how many mass graves there are. And all of these people are anonymous. You know, they cannot, nobody can visit them and remember them. But my aunt, because she is buried next to this old latrine, can be visited. She can be remembered. So this story taught me that despite the fact that my parents never talked about their experience before this time, despite the fact that they were still not comfortable telling me the whole truth about what happened to them, they really wanted to remember their loved ones. Because if they were not remembered, it was as if their life and their loss was of no consequence. So at this time, I'm just going to share with you a 5-minute trailer of the film, New Year Baby. I understand that next week you'll be showing the film somewhere here on campus, and there'll be opportunities to see the whole film, right? Yeah, okay. In my family, I'm known as the lucky one. I was born on the Cambodian New Year in a refugee camp. My parents never told me much more than that.
What do you like about Pa?
I like about Pa when he's not talking.
Everyone in my family all survived the Cambodian genocide. When I was a kid, I remember asking my parents, who are the Khmer Rouge? But they always dodged my questions. I was left to my own imagination. Last year, I came home for Christmas. Suddenly, my mom called a family meeting. In a back bedroom, she told us a secret she had been hiding for 25 years. I felt like I didn't know my own family, and I wondered what other secrets had they left behind in Cambodia. Is that it? Is that how you spell it?
Actually, yeah.
Oh.
It's a village.
Okay. It's the Khmer Rouge camp that my father was in. Okay, hello. This was my chance to finally understand what my parents went through.
Why you going to follow me out?
Papa, ada ya. Saya istri gue aja, mengai apa?
Do you remember when you met Matt?
No put the boy here.
Like every day when I woke up still alive. Thanks God that I'm still alive.
Right now we found a neck like a home.
Tại thế? Ở đằng thang lấy quỳ xa thứ, nên là on na có, không được plek bầm plek làm sai rồi, cầm chong là xuống đó. I cowboy. I cowboy long time. But
who is to say who wins or who loses? Sing to myself at the end of the day when I know what the blues is. And all my mistakes have become masterpieces.
So after I made New Year Baby, I was in Long Beach, California, which has the largest population of Cambodians in this country, and we were conducting a public forum there about the generational divide between the young and the old. And after the forum, there was this community leader who came up to me afterwards and said, you know, I think it's really important that all of these stories become recorded, and you're a filmmaker, you should be doing this work. So after 2 years from that forum, I started Khmer Legacies, which, as I mentioned, is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to record survivor testimonies by having the younger generation interview the older generation. And then we try to transform these testimonies into educational tools, whether that's through a school curriculum or through museum exhibits. And so I just wanted to show you a video about Khmer Legacies as well, so you can get a sense of what the work is about.
Khmer Legacies is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to document the Cambodian genocide through personal videotape testimonies. So the idea is that the younger generation of Cambodians are interviewing their parents about their story of survival. My family essentially was formed during the Khmer Rouge genocide. And it was that revelation that inspired me to direct a documentary film about their life, and also to create a larger organization that would give families the opportunity to pass this story on from generation to generation. My experience was very similar to a lot of Cambodian families in that their parents did not talk about their experience of surviving. They did not pass that story on to their children. I feel like it's even more pronounced in Cambodia itself, where you have this phenomenon of the younger generation not believing that the Khmer Rouge even happened. The mission for Khmer Legacies has many layers. On a personal level, I want the experience of telling your story for the first time to be an experience that opens the door for healing.
These stories may be traumatized, but it also can heal, right? But it's also to document how resilient our community is.
I want the experience to be one that bridges the generational divide between the young and the old. I felt it was important to take this opportunity to record these stories so that they will be there as living proof for many generations to come.
This was like my open door. If there's anything I want to know about my mom and, you know, our family, the time to ask is now.
When my parents pass, you know, I knew that this was going to be part of them that would live on. And so I think talking about these stories will help us bridge that divide between the generations and help us, make our story coherent.
I don't know other people's story, but this is my story. And I love to hear other people's story. I hope that when I do this, people come out and do more and more.
អត់មានណានិយាយចឹងកើតហើយគ្មានណាដែលហែកឆ្លងដោយតែអ្នកបាននិយាយប្រាប់នឹងទេដូច្នេះគឺថាវាមានប្រយោជន៍ហើយមានតម្លៃដែលមិនអាចប្រៀបផ្ទឹមបាន
I want the archive itself to be an educational tool to teach about genocide, because without awareness and education, I don't think prevention is possible.
So through my work in New Year Baby and in Khmer Legacies, I'm really promoting this idea that telling your story or uncovering your parents' story can open the door for healing. And as I mentioned, the most common criticism of this work is, that Cambodians really just want to forget about what happened to them. Who am I to tell them that they should speak out? So I take this criticism very seriously and have recently read a few things that have suggested to me that we really do need to be careful about imposing our own cultural values about expression onto Cambodians that may be in an inappropriate way. A few months ago, there was this article in the New York Times that was titled "The Americanization of Mental Illness," which warns against this tendency in America of imposing our conceptions of psychology in a way that it actually overtakes indigenous notions. And the article cites the work of anthropologists and psychiatrists who say that we intend to impose these notions upon mental illness, which, as it turns out, tends to express itself in widely different ways depending on the local culture. And again, this really made me consider whether or not I was doing the right thing, whether the central tenet of Khmer Legacies was valuable. This idea that telling your story can provide healing. Could this potentially be harmful for people? Was I doing the right thing by advocating that people tell their survival story? Or was I just promoting another Western solution to a Cambodian problem? So to answer this question, I had to learn about what actually happens to the brain when people undergo massive trauma and stress. So trauma, as it turns out, does have a physiological effect on the brain, which we really can't overlook. So the brain is divided into the amygdala, which is responsible for our emotional regulation and stress responses. And then there's the prefrontal cortex, which is the primary executive of the brain. And what happens under stress, under periods of extreme trauma, is that the amygdala will actually enlarge and strengthen, and therefore, our automatic behaviors are more predominant. So we actually become more and more stimulus-bound. We're just kind of reacting in an instinctive way to things as opposed to being thoughtful about things. Simultaneously, under periods of extreme trauma or stress, the prefrontal cortex will actually shrink, and a person living under these conditions actually becomes less able to react rationally. So somebody who is a PTSD victim, who has post-traumatic stress disorder, will switch from normal alert conditions to these more instinctive amygdala responses. And what therapy offers or provides is that it actually helps to engage the prefrontal cortex, allowing the predominance of the amygdala to decrease. And although I don't equate, telling your story or the video testimony process to therapy, what we must acknowledge is that a lot of Cambodians would never seek therapy or traditional ways, to deal with PTSD. And I believe that telling one's story, what it does is it promotes agency in oneself. By becoming the storyteller, the survivor becomes the author of their own story instead of being the object acted upon. So the work of one of my mental health advisors is a man by the name of Dory Laub at Yale, who has been studying the video testimony process on psychiatric patients. And he did a study of chronically hospitalized psychiatric patients in a hospital in Israel who were Holocaust survivors. And they all underwent a video testimony process. And following the first testimony, about 38% of the patients met the criteria for PTSD. After the second interview, that percentage went down to 19%, which is to say that after undergoing a video testimony process, these chronically hospitalized psychiatric patients actually decreased in their symptoms of PTSD. Now, Dr. Laub says that he is unsure whether this is due to the improvements in their PTSD symptoms are due to the result of having told their story, or whether speaking their narrative for the first time to this community actually changed the dynamics between doctors, nurses, and the patients. He doesn't know which one is going on, but the bottom line is that the video testimony process actually was able to decrease their PTSD symptoms. Now, another reason why I think this work is really important is that trauma not only affects the survivor generation, but actually affects the subsequent 2 generations. In this way, the survivor generation is too traumatized to actually deal with what happened to them and too traumatized to actually, tell their story. The second generation is at the effect of the trauma, but because they don't understand what happened, they don't know what is at the root of the trauma. And it's actually only the third generation that can sometimes begin to piece together this story and understand its implications. An interesting study that was just released a few years ago actually also determined that childhood trauma can actually alter your DNA. And so the implication is that this alteration can actually be passed down from one generation to the next. And over a victim's lifetime, what it means is that they're generally more vulnerable to stress for the rest of their life. I would also say that this work is important because there is a political cost to not speaking out. Today, in Cambodia, because the older generation doesn't tell their story and doesn't share this history with the younger generation, denial is rampant. As you saw in the Khmer Legacies clip, there's this phenomenon of the younger generation not believing that the genocide actually happened. My hope is that these stories can have unique benefits to the next generation. It's really common for the younger generation to harbor a fear about asking their parents about these stories because they don't want to re-victimize them. And this can often be used as a rationalization for not asking. But what we can consider is the possibility that survivors have not been speaking out, not because they never wanted to, but because they never thought they had an audience. So I believe as many people as there are out there who don't want to talk, there are just as many people who do want to talk, but never thought anyone was interested in listening. So I just wanted to share now a short video clip that is a compilation of a number of different testimonies that we did and that was shown in a museum, a video installation in Massachusetts this past spring that features clips of some of these video testimonies which I've captured.
I cannot be like other races. Yeah, I do speak English and stuff, but I'm still Cambodian.
ហើយយើងវាហើយខ្មែរក្រហមហ្នឹងក៏ខ្មែរដូចយើងដែរតែយើងមើលទៅយើងចេះឆ្ងល់ថាហេតុអ្វីបានជាខ្មែរយើងគេថាខ្មែរយើងម្ដងត្រូតបូតមិនចេះស្លាប់មនុស្សទេក៏ចុងក្រោយយើងចេះឆ្ងល់ថារឿងអីខ្មែរយើងចេះនិយាយគ្នាភាសាគ្នាស្ដាប់គ្នាបានហើយស្លាប់ហើយចេះនាំគ្នាកាប់ស្លាប់ដល់គ្នាឯងហើយចេះឆ្ងល់ដែរម្នាក់ៗឆ្ងល់តែ រមូលហេតុហ្នឹងវាអត់ឃើញ
ខ្ញុំមិនដែលបាននិយាយរឿងអស់ហ្នឹងប្រាប់ចៅហ្នឹងអារឿងតែរឿងខ្ញុំជូរចត់នៅពីដើមមុនណានិយាយវាមិនចេះស្ដាប់ទៀតដល់ក្មេងៗហ្នឹងបើកូនខ្ញុំសួរម្ដងខ្ញុំយំនិយាយកើតផង
ហើយនៅពេលនោះដូចយប់អីហ្នឹងចេះតែមានឆ្លបអីគេដើរសួរយ៉ាងហើយឡានគេដាក់យើងក្នុងមួយឡានទាហានគេដាក់30នាក់នៅពេលចូលទៅកន្លែងហ្នឹងគេជីកដៅឲ្យស្រ័យហើយគេយកអត្រាឬក៏សូនីជីកដីនឹងឲ្យស្រ័យគេឲ្យដល់កន្លែងហ្នឹងមនុស្សចុះនៅកន្លែងហ្នឹងគេបើកឡានចេញគេដាក់បំដាក់មីននៅកន្លែងឲ្យស្រ័យខ្ញុំឡានក្រោយគេខ្ញុំឮសូរសំឡេងតែផ្ទុះភូមិប្រផាំងមនុស្សស្រែកយោយ៉ាអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំលោតចុះលើឡានអត់សិនឈប់ផងឡានក៏នៅបើលឿនយឺតទេខ្ញុំលោតចុះរួចខ្ញុំរត់ចម្ងាយពីកន្លែងដែលគេចាប់ហ្នឹងខ្ញុំរត់យូរប្រហែលជាបើអង់គ្លេសគេហៅប្រហែលជា3ប្រហែលជា100 2អីឡើងទៅលើអញ្ចឹងណាព្រោះគេបាញ់គេចាប់ដើមបាញ់គេបាញ់រះគេបាញ់យកមែនតើខ្ញុំរត់រហូតទល់គ្នានឹងដេកព្រៃប្រហែលជា3យប់3ថ្ងៃបានខ្ញុំដើរមកដល់កន្លែងស្រុកដែលប្រពន្ធទាំងកូនខ្ញុំនៅណាយើងដើរតែថ្ងៃទេអត់ដើរតែយប់ទេថ្ងៃយើងអត់ដើរទេតែដើរថ្ងៃគេឃើញ
ពិបាកនៅកន្លែងហ្នឹងពិបាកស្លាប់តអស់មនុស្សទៅមុនបងមនុស្សច្រើនយូរទៅស្លាប់ឡើងអស់ឡើងស្ងាត់
ដូចគេរំដោះអីចឹងទៅគេថាអញ្ចឹងអ្នកឯងខ្ញុំទៅរកម្ដាយពុកអ្នកឯងទៅឲ្យយើងទៅរកម្ដាយពុកយើងនៅស្រុកភូមិផ្សេងៗហ្នឹងណាចាហើយអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំក៏ដើររទៅដើរតាមផ្លូវដើរទៅដូចចៃដន្យគាត់កំពុងបដើប្តីប្រពន្ធគាត់ហ្នឹងបានតែគោម្នុំណាគាត់ចេះអង្គុយថាអើយ3កូន3ចៅហ្នឹងនៅណាទេអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំចេះដើរហើយខ្ញុំឃើញខ្ញុំសលេងដូចសលេងម៉ែសលេងប៉ាអញ្ចឹងណាប៉ុន្តែមិនហ៊ានហៅប៉ាទេហៅតែពុកទេព្រោះអីនៅនឹងគេរឿងប៉ាសិតអ្នកអីអ្នកគេហៅយើងកូនធំកូនអ្នកធំហើយកូនចិនកូនអីដូចថាគេជំរុះហ្នឹងចោលគេហៅពុកម៉ែទេចារត់ទៅគូអត់ដឹងថាម៉ែខ្លួនឯងទេចេះរត់តាមក្រោយអាទេសហ្នឹងតែលោកមើលថាដល់ពេលអញ្ចឹងយំចាញ់ណាពេលហ្នឹងបើអត់យប់អីហើយខ្ញុំក៏យំចាញ់ដែរអើដូចកាំងណាដូចថារកអ្វីនឹងនិយាយជាមួយគ្នាមិនបានបើអាកូនរត់ចូលតាមអាទេសក្រោយខ្ទុយអាទេសហើយចាអញ្ចឹងទៅ
ចំនួននោះ75ហ្នឹងយើងបាត់ទាំងអស់ស្រុកយើងបាត់ទាំងអស់បាត់តាំងពីទំនៀមទម្លាប់តាំងពីអរិយធម៌វប្បធម៌ស្អីក៏បាត់អស់ដែរអត់មានទេសូម្បីតែសាសនាក៏យើងមានផងគេបាត់ទាំងអស់
He don't really care nothing. He just they say they like to do an American way. That's it.
តែមានច្បាប់ប្រឡប់ត្រឹមត្រូវយើងអាចរស់នៅស្រួលដែរមិនវាមិនពិបាកហើយកូនធំមកខ្ញុំថាប្រាប់កូនដែរថាថ្ងៃក្រោយយើងហើយជាយើងអាចទៅរស់នៅប្រទេសរបស់យើងវិញបានប៉ុន្តែរយៈពេលខាងហើយយើងអាចរស់នៅស្រុកយើងវិញបាន
So I'd like to think that Khmer Legacies is part of a different kind of nonprofit that tries to address the root causes of societal problems, not just the symptoms. There are a lot of very good nonprofits that deal with the symptoms. They give the homeless people food to eat if they need it, or a place to stay for the night, giving poor children subsidized meals, giving disaster victims relief in terms of food and aid. The Cambodian community has a number of challenges, like those that I mentioned here today. But what if these challenges, had some kind of fundamental root in the trauma and depression and anxiety that they experienced after the genocide? I think some people feel some amount of discomfort asking people to speak out who don't really want to, because in a way you're kind of challenging victims, not just trying to alleviate their pain. And what I'm proposing is that Khmer Legacies can help Cambodians by challenging them to muster up the courage to speak out. By challenging them, we're actually countering this image of survivors as being a very frail people and a frail community. But this is how we transform victims into survivors. Telling their story is an act of civic engagement. It's a powerful act that sees beyond a community's immediate needs and interests to the next generation and then to the world. In this case, I think the stakes are very high. You see, for me, this isn't just an oral history project. These are actually essential narratives of our modern history that have implications about, geopolitical maneuvers. So speaking out isn't just for Cambodians, I think it's for history and for the world. Because if we don't tell these stories, the rest of the world cannot learn from and be impacted by the human cost of genocide. A recent study by a sociologist named Paul Slovic tried to understand the impact of hearing stories of genocide and mass killing. And what he found is that data and dry facts about mass atrocities often creates a numbing effect. As you look at the data, the numbers become integers. They just become more and more abstract. And in fact, hearing an account of a victim beyond a number of one can actually severely decrease empathic responses. Which is to say that actually the most effective way to teach about genocide is to create an emotional connection, which hopefully can motivate action through these detailed personal narratives. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions now. I think Megan has a mic that will be passed around for anybody. You have one way up there.
I don't need a mic.
Okay.
How were you accepted when you went back to Cambodia? You, your dad, did you know anybody, or in the cultural dynamic there too for yourself? How did that go? And the second question, I have a lot of questions there. You were talking about media. Being a historian myself, I knew about this from beyond, 15, 16, maybe. I remember watching Apocalypse Now, and I was like 12. My dad took me, and I didn't understand it. And then another film that came out was The Killing Fields back in the late 80s, and that was really my first. I still didn't quite understand it. And I know that gentleman that did The Killing Fields, a couple years ago, he was still alive, and there was some stuff with him. I'm not sure if you were involved or you met him before. And how did that portray? What's your analysis on those films and what you've done, maybe that transition?
Sure. So the first question was how I was received in Cambodia. It was really wonderful to go to Cambodia for the first time, and when you see the film, that is my first trip to the country, and I've gone 3 or 4 times since then, but the first time was really incredible. To see this culture firsthand and to understand the culture firsthand and experience it firsthand, as opposed to it always being mediated through my parents. Because I had, up until that moment, I had always understood Cambodian culture kind of through my parents, and now I could see it, without having their mediation, and discover things that, I thought it was one way and actually it was another. And on the other hand, it also explained a lot about how I was raised and how my parents, raised us. One small example is that when we were very little, we didn't have a lot of money. We used to use really big beach towels as comforters, and I never understood why we did that. And we were the only families who did that. And when I went to Cambodia, what I saw was that because it's so hot there and humid, people sleep under like a terry cloth comforter because it actually wicks away your sweat at night. And that's when I realized that, you know, my parents hadn't just made this all up. They did come from someplace and get all these ideas from someplace. That was just one small example. In terms of how I am received there, I'm received like an honored guest. It's a culture that's very hospitable and likes foreigners and likes guests who come to visit them. And I'm also received as an American because I'm very Americanized and because I speak Cambodian with an accent. I'm not being treated the way a young woman is regularly treated in that society, and I get that privilege. You know, when I go there, I understand that. In terms of the other movies that have been made about this time and about this era, I think they were very, very important in instructing people in giving Americans, some point of reference to this history. So it's incredibly useful at that level. If you see New Year Baby, I think what I tried to do was not make that film because that film had already been made, and make a film that was really an American story about an American going back and trying to understand this history. And so there has been a kind of development in the narrative. It's no longer just the victim narrative, but kind of a narrative of, well, what do we do now that we know this is what happened, we have this information, how do we move on from here? And so that's what I think I try to contribute to the field. Yes?
I had a really hard time reading your subtitles, so I noticed they were on YouTube. What's your keyword to find them?
Sure. If you just go to YouTube and you put in Khmer Legacies or New Year Baby, you can see the trailer there. You can see any of these videos there. Yeah. Did all of you have a hard time reading the subtitles? Okay, I'll make them bigger next time. Yes?
Was there a reason why your parents at that point in time decided to tell you this information?
I don't actually know the answer to that. I've asked my mother that before, and she said that, well, she actually wanted to tell us 10 years earlier. She felt like 10 years earlier was the right time to do it. But then she kept on procrastinating and pushing it back and pushing it back and pushing it back. And on this particular Christmas, both of my, my whole family was basically there at once. And so this is the opportunity she decided to take. So I don't really know why she chose that year, that day, except for the fact that she had been waiting for 10 years and finally she couldn't contain it anymore. So.
And now that they told you, how their life is now? Are they happy?
I think there's more openness and honesty within the family because people can suddenly discuss things they've never discussed before. But I think my parents are still my parents, and they're still the same, and they still tease each other and bicker all the time. If you see the film, I don't think that making the film and seeing the film has really changed the dynamics in between my parents very much. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so, really, my siblings and I are the only family we know of in the Hmong culture that call my dad Father. And we asked my parents so many times, why did you call you Father? And they don't know. Because Ba means stick and Hmong. And Ba means fish in the ocean. So I was wondering, what does Ba mean in Cambodia?
It means dad. It means so it's possible that the village that your family came from had some Khmer ethnicity, Khmer blood in it. I mean, that's possible. I'm not sure. Yeah. So after the regime fell, they retreated into the jungles, into the northwestern part of the country, and really were in charge and controlled that region up until 1993 or so. So they were still alive, they were still around, just like, you know, in the jungle. In 2008, a process to prosecute senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge began in Cambodia that has been a joint partnership between the justice system in Cambodia and the United Nations. And so at this point, there are 9 people who are standing trial for crimes against humanity and genocide crimes and war crimes, etc. And so this is the first time in the history of this event that, you know, someone has been brought to justice for what has happened. The senior most leader, Pol Pot, died in 1998. People don't know whether he died by natural causes or he was poisoned by one of his enemies. And so actually, you know, another senior leader has actually died during this time as well. And I think that that has also been a big impediment to people feeling closure about this part of history, is that it has taken about a generation for there to be any justice to be delivered. Yes?
I was wondering, in one of the clips, there was a man who said something, you know, paraphrasing, something to the effect of the survivors are the only ones who can tell the story, which is true, of course, but that it has an ineffective purpose. And I just thought that was kind of a valid perspective and interest. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think what he said actually was that the survivors are the only ones who can tell the story, and so these testimonies have an invaluable purpose. Yes?
Yes, growing up and trying to understand my parents' background as long as well, and going through the educational system and trying to learn about the secret wars of Laos and the Vietnam War, you know, there really wasn't a whole lot of information. It's not just a brief section concerning my people's history and their role in the Vietnam War. Are you pushing for textbooks, whether it's, you know, high school, especially in high school when, you know, when we start learning about our culture on that, to incorporate, you know, part of your history into textbooks for students to learn about?
Yeah. You know, it's kind of less important to me that people learn about this specific history than they learn about genocide in general. And there are initiatives across individual states to pass laws or policies that mandate the teaching of genocide. And so I think 30 out of 50 states do have that mandate or like a strong recommendation that that be taught. And my hope then is that, you know, that the individual teachers who do teach about genocide not just focus on the Holocaust. It is really important, and there's no way that you can teach about genocide by kind of avoiding the Holocaust, obviously. But what I want for students to know is that this issue continues, is that it wasn't just this historical thing that happened during World War II, but genocides have continued in the second half of the 20th century, and that there are, you know, genocides going on today, and the potential for genocides. I believe that, you know, during the 20th century, more people died of mass atrocities, you know, of their own state killing them basically, than of wars, than of all wars, and that's a really staggering phenomenon, and that's one of the reasons people call the 20th century the century of genocide. So I really want the education in general to be part of what it means to be, you know, of a civic education. Thank you.